Hello and welcome to my presentation on W.E.B. Du Bois. I selected him as my multicultural hero based off of his contributions to civil rights as well as the field of sociology. William Edward Bogart du Bois was born on February 23rd, 1868 in Massachusetts. He died on August 27th, 1963. So he lived during a very interesting time period. Um, First of all, the Reconstruction era, which was from 1865 to 1877, was highly impactful. This was the initial civil rights movement that kind of occurred after the Civil War. In addition to that, during this time, there was also the Jim Crow laws. So he was growing up during the height of that. The Jim Crow laws required public places to be segregated based on race. Now, because he was born and raised in Massachusetts, he was less impacted by them because they were more so enacted in the South. However, when he went to college, it was something that did affect him. And we'll talk more about that on the next slide. So he was a civil rights champion and a scholar with invaluable contributions to the field of sociology. For his education, he did attend Fisk University for his bachelor's degree. That was in Nashville, Tennessee. So this is kind of where the Jim Crow laws come into play. When he was doing his primary and secondary education, that was in Massachusetts. So he went to a predominantly white school. He was the first Black student to graduate from that school. So his race, at least initially, did not really impact the education that he had access to. So when he got to Fisk University and he was impacted by the Jim Crow laws, he had a different perspective of the social injustices that were occurring that many other people did not necessarily have. And then from his experience, he eventually went on to get an additional bachelor's degree, master's, and then a doctorate degree from Harvard University. And he was the first Black person to obtain a doctorate degree from Harvard. And he attained that degree in 1895. Now to discuss more of the work that he did during his lifetime. Again, he was a very large champion of civil rights. So the first thing I want to highlight, and this is not an exclusive list of everything that he's done. There's way more than what I could talk about in a five-minute presentation. So what I wanted to highlight was some of the work he did with the University of Penn. In 1899, together they released a study called the Philadelphia Negro Study. It was a huge contribution to the field of sociology, and in that study, which was very large, he was looking at the urban population and identifying the existing social problems in that community. So that was a huge landmark study in identifying social injustices that were occurring. From there, he was a founder of the Niagara Movement, which he did in 1905. Now, this was essentially a protest group that was made up of scholars, and they advocated for total civil rights. So for complete equality, which at the time, there was also an opposing group that was not arguing for the institution of total civil rights. From there, he was the founder of the NAACP, which is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which is an organization that is still working today. As part of founding this organization, he also developed the organization's magazine, which was called The Crisis. He founded it and he edited it. And this magazine actually provided a voice for Black writers that at the time they were not necessarily getting. He did eventually leave the NAACP. He does come back later on in his career. By 1934, he was working as a chair of sociology in the department at Atlanta University. Throughout his life, he did work as a professor in many different institutions, and he continued his work for civil rights up until his death. His work in civil rights included many essays and speeches, as well as presenting in front of the United Nations, and then eventually even working to end apartheid in Africa. So here are my references on this slide for the pictures and the resources where I found my information from. Thank you for listening.